What is up, sports fans, college football fans to be exact? Because today we're going to talk about the top 25 and we're going to preview the games coming up for this week. So I'm excited about this video today. Follow along. So I am going to go in right now to share out the screen when we're going to talk about the top 25 for this week in college football. So make sure everything's good here on my end. Yep, there we go. We're on the screen. So the AP poll, the first thing you'll notice is the 1 through 4 is exactly the same. And in the coaches poll, 1 through 5 is exactly the same. So start off AP poll, Texas is number 1 again. Georgia is number 2 again. Ohio State is number 3 again. Alabama is number 4 again. And up one spot from 6 to 5 in the AP poll is Tennessee. In the coaches poll, you have Georgia and Texas reversed. Georgia's number 1 in the coaches. Texas is number 2. Ohio State's 3 in both. Bama's 4 in both. Ole Miss is 5 in the coaches. And they're number 6 in the AP poll. So those two are reversed. The big game this week that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, of course, is number 4, Alabama, number 2, Georgia in the AP, or in the coaches, number 1, Georgia, and number 4, Alabama. Okay, so continuing down the AP poll, you have number 7. We stopped at number 6, Ole Miss. Number 7 is Miami. Looks like they're bringing the U back. I'm like, this offense looks fantastic. They got great quarterback play this year from Cam Ward. This team looks like a machine. They should run through the ACC. If they lose a game, any game in the ACC, it's going to be a huge disappointment, in my opinion. But over 20 years, and they haven't won the ACC yet. Well, not over 20 in the ACC, because 20 years ago they were still in the Big East. But they've been in the ACC close to 20 years, and they've never even – well, they did play for the ACC championship game, I believe, once. They've never won the ACC. Number 8 is Oregon, and they're number 7 in the coaches poll. Oregon, they looked a lot better in their last game. Their first 2 games, they really struggled. They had a bye week this week. We'll see if they can get that thing rolling. Coach Landers, they got a talented team, but we're waiting to still see them get it rolling. Number 9 is Penn State in the AP poll, and they're number 8 in the coaches poll. Miami's actually from 7 in the AP poll. They're 9 in the coaches poll. So coaches aren't as impressed with the Hurricanes. Utah comes in at 10 in both polls, and Utah got a nice win last week again on the road against the Oklahoma State team that was ranked near the top 10. So give Utah a lot of credit for that. Number 11 is Missouri. They actually dropped 4 spots in the AP poll, and they're number 11, dropping 3 spots in the coaches poll. Missouri did not look good against Vanderbilt. Had to go to overtime at home against Vanderbilt, a team most would have thought was the worst in the SEC. I think Mississippi State's clearly shown up to this point they are the worst team in the SEC. I think there may be a few teams in the SEC a little bit worse than Vanderbilt, including Auburn. Auburn's pretty terrible, so Mississippi State's the worst. So Vanderbilt, they look a little bit improved, but Missouri, you got to do better than that, my guys. You're at home. You're supposed to be a near top 10, or near top 5 team, number 7 in one poll, number 8 in the other, and you come out at home, lay an egg, and survive Vanderbilt. Got to do better, but at the end of the day, it's all about getting the W. Win, survive, advance. It doesn't matter. You can win them all by 1. If you keep winning, you'll move up eventually in the end. Number 12 is Michigan, up 6 spots and up 5 in the coaches. What a win for them against SC. Didn't think they would beat SC. They lost a lot of players. Their defense still looks good. Sharon Moore, give that man his props right there. Good job, Michigan. Sharon Moore. Defense still has it, even though they lost some players. Great win for them against a good USC team. Speaking of USC, they're number 13 and number 16 in the coaches poll. The Trojans, now they still got plenty of time, only 1 loss. If they want to be a playoff team, but certainly this was a disappointing loss, to say the least, for the Trojans. The team the Trojans beat the first game of the season is 1 spot below them in the AP poll, and actually a couple spots ahead of them at 13 in the coaches poll, and that's the Bayou Bengals. from right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, over on Nicholson Highway. Tigers did not look good in the first half, I should say, against UCLA. 17-17, defense struggled, secondary still looked like crap, but boy, the Tigers looked good in the second half, outscoring the Bruins 17-0. Defense stepped up this game. In order for LSU to make the playoffs at the end of the year, that secondary in particular, the defense is going to have to step up its game in the SEC, because I don't think LSU has room to lose more than one more game. Maybe two more if they make it to the SEC title game and lose. But yeah, 2 wins, 2 losses, 3 is going to be hard. Someone may get in with 3 losses, but I would not want to be that team that's fighting to get in with 3. So there's only really room for one more loss. So that defense got to tighten up. Number 15 is Louisville, coming in at 3-0. I think they have a big game coming up, 17 in the coaches poll. We're going to look at the games in a moment. Notre Dame is number 16. That win they had wasn't pretty, but they pulled away, and 14 in the coaches. Number 17 is Clemson, up 4 spots, and up 4 spots to 15 in the coaches. Boy, Dabo has that thing rolling after that ugly loss the first week to Georgia. Dabo, they got that offense rolling. Cade Klubnik looks like the guy that he was supposed to be when they picked him up as a 4-star recruit out of Texas. Cade Klubnik looks good. Clemson looks good on offense. And they've only had 2 games since then, but those 2 games, they looked really good on offense, steamrolling opponents. Iowa State comes in at number 18. Their big win of the year was against Iowa. They're 3-0, so 18 and then 19 in the coaches poll. Number 19, you got the Illinois Illini coming in. They got a big win this week against Nebraska to move up in the poll. That was a battle of 2 teams that was undefeated. And then number 21 in the coaches poll. So Illinois is a team on the rise. So interesting to see what Illinois looks like there, see if they can keep it going. Oklahoma State dropped in the poll down to number 20 after suffering their first loss of the season, as I mentioned earlier, against a good Utah team. They're down 6 spots. They lost at home, and they dropped 5 spots in the coaches poll to number 20. Number 21 is Oklahoma, down 6 spots, lost at home to a really good Tennessee team. 21, and then coming in at number 18 in the coaches poll. Number 22 is BYU, in both polls, they're 4-0 in the season. Hopefully, for their sake, they can keep it going. Number 23 is Kansas State. Kansas State down 10 spots as they lost their first game of the week in an ugly game against BYU. BYU moved in the poll for beating them. Kansas State dropped out, played poorly in that game, 25 in the coaches poll. UNLV is number 23 only in the coaches poll. A little bit of a concern for the undefeated Rebels of UNLV. As we found out today, their starting quarterback, who's played really well, he's not playing anymore the rest of the year from what we understand. The university is trying to fight it, but he wants to keep his red shirt, and he wants to transfer next year, but he wants to keep that extra year of eligibility by deciding, hey, I'm not going to play the rest of the year. University's trying to fight it, but I don't know if they can. Number 24 in both polls, the Aggies of Texas A&M up 1 spot in the AP and staying the same in the coaches poll. Number 25, Boise State in the AP poll. And they come in, move into the poll for the first time. Some teams that are right outside of the poll. Washington State right outside of the poll on both fronts. Indiana's looked good this week right outside of the poll. Boston College. UNLV, of course, I mentioned there in the coaches, but right outside of the AP poll. James Madison's right outside of both polls. They looked really good, putting up a 70 burger on UNC last week. Give them a lot of props for that. All right, so now we're going to move on to the games. I'm going to talk a little bit about the games for this upcoming week. So I'm going to get out of that screen, and we're going to go into this screen. Okay, so top 25 matchups is what I'm going to be looking at right here. The first top 25 match is Friday night in Miami Gardens as the Miami Hurricanes and Cam Ward, who's having a amazing season. He's like number one Heisman candidate, perhaps 1,439 yards, 14 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions on the season. Take on a Virginia Tech team that's not particularly great. Like I said, if this is not the year that the Canes win the ACC and make the playoffs, it's never going to happen. They're a 19.5-point favorite against Virginia Tech. I expect them to roll in that game. We go to the Saturday games in the early window. You got the Ole Miss Rebels hosting Kentucky. They're a 17.5-point favorite. They should win that game relatively easy, though we saw Kentucky play the hell out of Georgia. So they're not a lost cause. So they can be competitive in that game. Tell you what, Dart's been really good, the quarterback for Ole Miss. They hadn't really had a lot of competition, but he's got over 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So we'll see how Ole Miss keeps that thing going. Also in that early window, you got Michigan and Minnesota. If I'm not mistaken, that's the Little Brown Jug game. I know Minnesota's in the Little Brown Jug. I think that's the game against Michigan. Michigan's a 9.5-point favorite. Michigan should take care of business in Ann Arbor, but look for the letdown because that was a huge win last week against USC. So you don't want that letdown to happen this week. Then you got Kansas State versus Oklahoma State, two teams that are both top 25 teams that suffered losses last week. Both teams looking to bounce back. Kansas State is at home. They're a 4.5-point favorite. Oklahoma State, like I mentioned, took a tough loss at home to Utah last week. Both of these teams in desperate need of bouncing back. One of them is going to drop out of the top 25. So big game for both teams. Whoever loses this game, he can pretty much already kill their playoff hopes. BYU coming in 4-0, number 22, taking on Baylor, who lost that crazy game to primetime Deion Sanders. Travis Hunter making big plays, making moves for Colorado in that game, forcing turnovers, making big catches. And as they beat Baylor, dropped Baylor to 2-2 and 0-1 in the Big 12. Big game this week. BYU got that huge win last week against Kansas State. So they're hoping Baylor's hoping to catch BYU a little bit of a letdown after last week. Baylor's a 3.5-point favorite, but they know BYU is going to be really high on themselves. They're going to be really high after that game. The Trojans of Southern California, 15.5-point favorite over Wisconsin. I'm not sure if Van Dyke's playing. I know he got hurt a couple weeks ago against Bama. 15.5 is a good number of points. Wisconsin's a pretty good team. If I was betting on the game, which I'm not, I probably would roll with Wisconsin. But USC and Miller Moss should get a little bounce back here and get the dub at home. Notre Dame's playing Louisville. I knew Louisville had a big game against a tough opponent. Couldn't remember it off the top of my head, but here it is, 15 versus 16. Louisville 3-0 in the season. Opportunity to prove themselves and show that they belong at the top of the ACC right there with the other teams. Notre Dame's a 6.5-point favorite at home. This is a really tough game to pick. Don't know a whole lot about Louisville in terms of if this Louisville team's for real or not. We know Notre Dame has been a little bit up and down. We've seen them roll against Purdue. We've seen them struggle losing to Northern Illinois, But yeah, this is their opportunity to show themselves against a good football team and prove that they're a legitimate playoff team. Number 21, Oklahoma's playing an SEC game against Auburn, who was one of the worst teams in the conference at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Oklahoma's only a 2.5-point favorite. That's not a lot of respect for the Sooners because I think Auburn's a bad team. I think Auburn might be the second worst team in the conference with Mississippi State, the only one being worse. I think Oklahoma should cover 2.5 points with pretty good ease, in my opinion. I think they should win this game by 10-14. Arkansas, 4-point underdog against number 24 Texas A&M Aggies. 2:30 game on ESPN. That game is being played in Arlington, Texas, a.k.a. Jerry World. You know Jerry Jones is an Arkansas alum. He's an Arkansas guy. He's always at that game in the press box supporting the Hogs. The Hogs, I think, have a legitimate chance here. They've always been such an up-and-down program. And I tell you what, I think this is a game that they can take. It's going to be an interesting game. I think it's a coin flip game, in my opinion. Mississippi State coming in 1-3, as I mentioned. They're the worst team in the SEC. They got destroyed by Toledo 2 weeks ago, and then got the floor mopped up by the Gators, who aren't very good. The Gators looked very good last week, beat them by 21, I believe. Texas Longhorns, 39-point favorite with Arch Manning playing. Of course, Quinn Ewers still out hurt. You can rest Quinn Ewers until you got the big game coming up next week. You could easily smash Mississippi State and cover that 39 points. I think this game's over by halftime. Ohio State plays visiting Michigan State. Michigan State's coming in at 3-1, 1-0 in the conference, but a 24-point underdog in East Lansing against the number 3 ranked team in the country, the Buckeyes. Buckeyes should roll in this game. Their receiver, Judkins, he's phenomenal. If you've watched him play, he's a great receiver. Their running back, Judkins. I'm sorry, I said receiver, but he's a fantastic running back. Got over 336 yards rushing and 5 touchdowns on the season. Buckeyes should have no problem taking care of Michigan State here, 25 points. 24 points is a pretty high number, but there's a chance they could cover that. Clemson's been rolling the past 2 weeks after that, not looking good against Georgia. They're a 21.5-point favorite against those trees, the Stanford Cardinals. I like Stanford Cardinal, not Cardinals, excuse me. But going down there to their version of Death Valley, not the real Death Valley. But I think Clemson should win that game. Dabo's got them rolling for the last couple weeks. Stanford's not that good. I think they should win that game pretty easily. Iowa State going on the road to Houston. Houston's struggling this year. They've been a good program. They've not been good this season, only 1-3, 0-1 already in the Big 12. They got a home date, 14-point underdog against Iowa State. Iowa State better be careful, though, because this is a type of sleeper type game, a team that's struggling on the road. You're a 2-touchdown favorite. Stranger things have happened. So the next game I'm looking at is the game of the week. This is the game that everybody's talking about, and I'm referring to the Georgia Bulldogs, a 2-point favorite on the road against Alabama. Okay, so this game here, Alabama sort of had Georgia's number besides the national championship game when they played in the past. Of course, they kept Georgia out of the playoffs despite a perfect regular season going into the SEC championship game, taking care of Georgia last year in the SEC championship. And Georgia's going to Tuscaloosa. I tell you what, I would like Alabama in this game just because they've had Georgia's number. I know there's a different coach. There's no Nick Saban in charge, but I think Alabama can beat Georgia in this game. They're at home. Georgia's a 2-point favorite. Georgia, I don't know if they were looking ahead, but they looked like hot doo-doo butter against Kentucky. They did not look good against Kentucky, so Georgia's got to play better to beat Alabama, but perhaps they're looking ahead. So the next game this is a big one, battle of undefeated teams, 6:30 p.m. East, 6:30 p.m. Central, on NBC. 2 Big Ten teams. Illinois, the University of Professor Mark Walters, of course, in Walters World. His Illinois Illini, 19th ranked team in the country, 4-0, going on the road against a 3-0 number 9 ranked Penn State. Penn State, a 19-point favorite. I would take Illinois all day for 19 points, but they're going to have a tough time. Penn State at home. This could be Penn State's year to finally make some noise. They're always that team every year. They're good, and they would make the playoffs, but with a 14 playoff, they're never good enough to get in that 14 playoff. Next game is the Bayou Bengals at home. LSU Tigers against South Alabama. South Alabama put 87 points against one of the worst teams in America, the Northwestern State Demons, a couple weeks ago. South Alabama, they have the offense. They started off 0-2. They won their last 2 games. LSU's a 22-point favorite. LSU's defense, as I mentioned earlier, has got to get better. The secondary in particular has been trashed for a few years. I would actually probably take South Alabama under 22 points. I think LSU should win this game, though. Relatively easy, 17 to 20 points, but I think South Alabama should give them some problems for sure. Washington State coming in 4-0, unranked at Albertson Stadium, the blue turf, number 25, Boise State, 7.5-point favorite down at Albertson Stadium. I think Washington State could be primed to pull off the upset here and go to 5-0. I could see it happening. They're 7.5-point underdog. I think Washington State's a good football team, so we'll see if they can pull it off or see if Boise State can keep it moving. I mean, their one loss this year, they were very competitive against a highly ranked Oregon team, which we'll get to in just a minute. All right, so got some late night games here. Arizona taking on a Utah. Utah 4-0, ranked number 10. Arizona 2-1. Utah is an 11-point favorite. I like Utah to win this game. Probably cover the 11 points and just keep it rolling. Last game I'm going to talk about in the top 25 is number 8, Oregon. UCLA, they're not that good. They're 1-2 on the season. Oregon's a 25.5-point favorite on the road. We saw UCLA hang in there with LSU last week before the Tigers overpowered them and were just a better team. I expect Oregon to do much of the same. I think 25.5 is a lot. Last week, I told you I would have taken UCLA, and the spread was 24.5 at the time. I think it got down to 22 against LSU because I just think that's a lot of points. Oregon's on the road. And Oregon may be looking to dominate this game and destroy UCLA because they have not been dominant this year. But on paper, if you tell me I have to take someone right now, I'd probably take UCLA because I just feel like the way that Oregon is played, I don't think that they're 25.5 points better based off of the way they've played. So we got some big matchups this week. Again, as I mentioned, talk about some top 25 matchups to look out for. Evening time matchup, Illinois, Penn State. Big matchup of undefeateds. The game of the week on ABC. The Georgia Bulldogs, number 2. The Alabama Crimson Tide, number 4. Absolute monster matchup there. Louisville at 2:30 in the evening. Central taking on Notre Dame. That's 15 versus 16. Big game to pay attention to. Another top 25 matchup in the early window. Number 20, Oklahoma State. Number 23, Kansas State. That should be a good football game as well. So a lot of good football action this week for you to pay attention to and check out, if you will. So it's going to be a fun week for college football. Going to have a video coming up soon on the NFL as well. Expect that coming out maybe later today or tomorrow. We'll preview the games and we'll talk about this past week's action in the NFL. But again, on this channel, though, I want you to know it's just not going to be just about football. We're going to be doing plenty of NBA talk. I like to try to squeeze in some WNBA. We're going to talk Major League Baseball playoffs, even though my Rays won't be there. We'll still talk a little bit about it. Talk a little bit about everything. I'll even talk about hockey if I can make time for it. So going to be a little bit of everything, but it'll probably be more football than anything because we love football around here. There's always peace in sports. See y'all later.